Hello, my name is Luke, and this is my story. I've grown up going to church for almost my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are here in the children's ministry and in the youth ministry when I was a kid. So I've known Jesus my entire life, and he's played a huge role for all of my life. And today I'm going to tell you guys about my calling to ministry. So ever since I've been in middle school, Kenny Schubert has been the youth pastor, and anytime I would be at the youth group, he would always tell me, "Luke, you're gonna be a worship pastor or a youth pastor or a preacher," and he would always just kind of egg me on and joke with me about it, and I would just brush it off and laugh it off and never really take him seriously because I just thought he was joking about it. But as I grew up and began to mature, I felt a tug to do ministry, but I had never felt the full calling from God. Until my sophomore year of high school, I went to a winter week of camp at Smoky Mountain Christian Camp, and we were in the session one night in the chapel, and the speaker was up there, and he began to talk, and he said these words. He said, "This is why I love Luke so much." And I thought he was talking about the book in the Bible, because growing up it was always, open your Bibles to Luke chapter blah, blah, blah. And that's always when my mind would start to refocus in. So in that moment, I wasn't paying a lot of attention. And he said, "This is why I love Luke so much." And I began to pay attention. And he continued to say, he's always willing to serve and ready to serve. And I could just see him in the middle of the rainforest somewhere preaching the gospel. And as he said that, I just felt the voice or the Spirit of the Lord come over me. And it's a difficult thing to describe, but how I knew it was God was that I wouldn't have thought of this because that was the last thing that I thought was coming to my head. But I felt the Lord tell me, "Luke, you're going to be in ministry." And at that moment I began to freak out. I didn't know what to do. I was just like, I have to tell somebody. So I think everybody at the camp knew that I wanted to go into ministry from that moment. And I just began to tell people about it, and I was just so happy that I just felt the Lord move like that in my life. And I began to pray about it and just talk to God, and that's what I wanted to do. And as I continued to go through high school, it was, I'm going to be in ministry until my senior year of high school. I was in a college career finance class, and the teacher handed us a sheet of paper, and there were some questions on it, and the questions were, what is a career that you would be interested when you graduate high school? And I remember sitting there with my pencil in my hand, and I felt ashamed, and I felt discouraged and embarrassed that I wanted to write down that I wanted to work in ministry and I wanted to work in a church. So I didn't write that down. I wrote down that I wanted to be a teacher and that I wanted to be a counselor or whatever. I don't really remember. So from that moment, I had began to run away from what God had called me to do because I just didn't feel like I was good enough to do that, and I'm not equipped, and I'm not cut out to work in ministry, that was my thought process. So I just began to run from what the Lord had called me to do. So from that moment, my senior year, I was pretty locked into going to Johnson University and filling out my application. I didn't know what to put down as my major, so I just decided to put undecided, and I was going to go to Johnson and just coast and figure out what I wanted to do and just kind of stay where I was. So I got to Johnson, and it was a really difficult transition for me. A lot of wrestling and a lot of just wrestling with God because I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I feel called to ministry, but I don't feel good enough for it. I don't feel cut out for it. I just can't do this, God. I'm just going to stay undecided, and I'm just going to stay still and just stay here. And I took my gen ed classes and didn't really have anything major specific, and I was just stuck. I felt stuck in the mud, and I was like, I'm not good enough to do this ministry thing. I'm not cut out for it. And through all this time, I was volunteering in the youth group here, leading worship and leading small group and everything. But even then, I was still like, this isn't it for me. I'm not good enough for this. Until this changed when Kenny texted me and was like, "Hey, do you want to be a youth leader at TCTC this year?" And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, this would be the funnest thing ever. So TCTC rolls around that fall semester, and we're in Gatlinburg. We're having a blast. And I remember the Sunday morning session, the last one. I remember being there and thinking, the Lord is not going to move in my life. I'm a leader. This is for the students. I'm just here for them. God's not going to speak to me at all this week. And boy, was I wrong. The Sunday morning session was happening, and we were worshiping, and I was standing next to Kenny, actually, and he leans over to me in the middle of the song, and he says, "You know what, Luke? You would make a really great youth pastor. You can sing and lead worship, you can teach, you're good with kids, you're good with small groups, and you would just be a really good youth pastor." And in that moment, God spoke directly through Kenny right to my heart. And I was just overcome with emotion and overcome with just this feeling of, God, you've called me to do this, but I feel like I'm not good enough for this. And I lean over to Kenny and I'm like, dude, we got to go talk about this. So we leave the session and we go out to the hallway and we begin to talk. And I'm just telling him, like, Kenny, like, I don't know why God would call me to do this. Like, I feel like that I'm not good enough to do this. I feel like that I'm not cut out for this ministry thing. I don't know why God would call me. Like, out of everyone, why me? And Kenny was like, you know what, Luke? I think that's the first step of feeling inadequate and surrendering that to God, because He equips us and He encourages us and He gives us the things we need to fulfill His calling for us. And that whole conversation, I was like, whoa. I've never even heard of that before. And the big thing was just taking the next step, taking the leap into ministry and putting my full trust and my full faith that God is calling me to this, and that, I don't feel like I'm good enough to do this, but He's going to equip me and He's going to call me to do this. And from that moment, I was all in for youth ministry, and I got back to Johnson, and I went straight to the registrar's office to get the sheet of paper to change my major, and I tracked down my professors and the people that needed to sign the papers, and I got it, and I switched my major to ministry leadership with a concentration of preaching and student ministry. From that moment, I have just felt so at home with where I was in my walk with the Lord and what I was doing, volunteering here on Wednesday nights and Sunday nights, and going to events, leading worship, leading small group, teaching in the youth group. I've just felt the provision of God and just the validation that, yes, Luke, this is what you're supposed to do. I've called you to do this, and I have you where I want you. Through all of this, I've still had moments where it's like, God, I'm just not good enough to do this. And every time He has shown up and He's encouraged me and He's equipped me and He has lifted me up, and I've felt Him just placing me where I need to be. And if I could have one thing that you guys would take away from this, is that what God is calling you to do is what you're supposed to do, and you might not feel like you're good enough for it, or you might not feel like you're cut out for it, but He encourages you and He equips you, and Jesus' sacrifice on the cross is enough for you and is enough to encourage you and equip you for what the Lord is calling you to do.